It's an amazing story that he has been able to fit into his schedule. He was one of the first people, one of the first ECEF speakers to say yes. He was one of the first speakers to agree on a blog. He's been just a gem to work with. And the experience that he has, and when the very first phone call I had, and I'd never met him, and I don't like being tough on my first calls, but I said, Mike, I said, we really, if you're going to talk about data and technology and events, and I said, I don't mean to do this on our first call, but I said, you have to give us a behind the scenes, you have to give us some real information. Don't tell us that we need data, or data's important, or we'll be data driven. We've heard that for years. Please tell us some good stuff. And he agreed that he wouldn't tell us anything proprietary, and that's fine, but I think you'll all agree that he's got a really important message that we're all going to learn from. Mike?
That may be an old picture. It's funny, true story, is I have that suit and that shirt with me, and I was going to wear it. And then I realized it was here, and I figured, it probably wouldn't be good. Or maybe it would be good. So I'm Mike Clapperton. I'm the CTO for Informa Global Exhibitions. And I'm here to talk about your data capture program. You will probably fail. And how do you stop yourself from doing that? Now, there was an interesting statistic, actually a couple of interesting statistics I got this morning, is that 51% of you are going through some kind of enterprise application rollout, and that 75% of you, or 74%, something like that, were happy with the way it was going. And the funny thing about that is because 70%, according to CIO Magazine, enterprise application deployments fail. So, are you happy with failure? No, I don't think so. All right, so who am I? I've been in IT for the past 25 years. I've also had a lot of sales experience too in the financial services area, and IT as well, for Farmers Insurance and the financial services, Staples for the retail space, and in the last 3 jobs I've had have been in the events management space, starting with GLM probably 5-6 years ago. Moved over to Clarion for about a year as a consultant, and now at Informa as a CTO. I'm also a 2-time entrepreneur with 2 successful exits, 1 financial services startup and 1 software startup. And for you junkies out there for process, I'm a Lean Six Sigma black belt, almost master black belt, not quite, and a business process design practitioner. So if you're interested in that, you can come see me and talk to me later. So first, what do I mean by data capture program? Well, simply, a data capture program is a systemized program to secure one customer record across multiple systems in multiple views. So you have your financial system, you have your marketing system, you have your sales system, you have your operations and delivery systems. It's all the same record, just different views of the same thing. So what does it look like? Well, this is what ours looks like. All right, thank you, I'm done. Now, so we start off in our journey. We start off, and I'm gonna have to turn around for this because that's too small. We start off with our marketing, as we all do, and we market to our exhibitors and our attendees. They do that through some sort of campaign, whatever that campaign looks like. And then from there, it drives a customer behavior, whether or not it's attending exhibitors is immaterial, will be different through a website or a phone call or some sort of downloading a white paper, whatever. And we capture that information in our exhibitor attendee behavior. And then from there, we go into sales, and that elicits some sort of phone call or some sort of interaction with us. And we try to sell them product, whether it's print, digital, subscriptions, floor space, a new car, anything you want to sell. And then we capture that information, send it over to the financial system, and then send it over to operations to deliver it. And then once it's delivered upon, we get that information back and then feed it all back up into the marketing platform so that we do it again the next year. So that's essentially it on what we do. All this stuff is connected, but Mike Clapperton at Informa is Mike Clapperton Informa is Mike Clapperton Informa is Mike Clapperton Informa across the entire platform. And this is just a linear way of how to look at it. This is basically with some of our tools. So bypass that. So what is it going to cost you? Well, it cost us $12 million. Now, mind you, we're a multinational company that does business in just about every place on earth, and we have a lot more events than you may have, and we're B2B, and so you don't have to spend $12 million. I'm going to give you the punchline now, is you don't have to spend that kind of money. But we have software licenses, training, plugins, data migration, third-party integrations, third-party resources, internal resources, maintenance. All these things cost a lot of money, and of course, well, you see the result. Note, again, we're a lot different than you, but if I were to break it out per event, we're about 35,000 an event. So now, again, we're also using enterprise level tools. We're using things that are a lot more expensive than you might use. So just keep that in mind. You can do it for a lot less. So how do we make sure that money is well spent? Well, what are the common pitfalls? How do I avoid them? That's where we're going to spend the rest of the time here, and I'll leave some Q&A stuff, and I actually wrote down a few just in case I run out of time and you guys don't have any questions. I just have some extras as well. Bonus material. Okay. I'm going to have to turn around for this. Oh, there we go. Thank you. So first part is ownership. Who owns this project? Traditionally, if you have business ownership, they really understand the events business. They understand the way you run the event, but they usually lack the understanding about how data works and how you actually move data across the organization and make it relevant. So the result is usually automation of existing processes, which may or may not be good, right? On the other side of the coin, we have IT. They lack the intimate knowledge of how to run an event, or they may, if they've been around for a while, maybe they understand how to run an event a little bit, but they don't really know the ins and outs, but they know how to run a system. And so what they'll do is they're going to say, we do this today, just automate it, and then again, same result, automation of existing poor processes. So how do you do this? What's your solution? You have to really have IT and business ownership together. That's the only way to do it. So you hire somebody, a business process architect, to really understand your business and map every single detail, but every single thing you do across the organization. Sorry, water break. So when you have that, you need to agree how the projects run, agree how you're going to measure your product, what is important to you today and what's important to you in the future. And then you have to design your processes first, then your system. And that's everything. So anything from finance all the way down to how do you deliver the event. You need to roadmap every single detail. If you do that, you have a much higher success rate than if you were to just start going forward. Seek to simplify your processes, though. Make sure that just because you do it one way today, don't continue doing that. See if that's the most opportune time. And a lot of times in registration, I see this all the time, is where you have these lines that kind of wind all over the place. But there was a study about lines in the events business, and it's, believe it or not, in many cases, having one long line is better than having 15 short ones. And a lot of people don't really realize that. That's the extent of my knowledge in that area, so don't ask any questions. So, yeah. Okay, assign your IT and business ownership for each process and what's during the design phase and when you maintain it. So once it's going forward, you want to make sure that those people are still on the hook later on, right? Have a dedicated project manager, and you should make sure this is not a third-party vendor if at all possible. Now, you may need to do it anyway, but the reason is because you want somebody who kind of knows the business, right? And I would say it's not necessarily an IT person, although they could be tech savvy. That would be very helpful. If you have the technical expertise in-house, obviously use them, but if you need to hire an integrator, you may need to, and resources to own the system afterwards. That's very, very important. Just because you put it in today, it's not going to keep. It's like fish, It's like if you let it age too much, it doesn't make it any better. Just wine, I guess. And focus on doing one thing at a time well. Don't focus on a bunch of things, because you're not going to get a great result. Pitfall 2. And this is a big one, buy software that does it all. We do everything. We do finance, We do inventory, we do delivery, we do, of all products, we do financial, we do great at financial. If somebody starts going through and say, we do everything, then really, in most cases, you should run. Now, the reason why you might not do that, and actually, if you sell like 1 or 2 products and they're not very complicated, maybe that might work, right? I mean, probably not for your financials, but maybe that works. If you just sell booth inventory and that's all you sell, then there are products out there that work really well for that. But they don't do marketing automation. They don't do data management, which is MDM, master data management. They don't do your sales process necessarily that well. They don't necessarily do proposals that well. But you're going to get a complete program. But I would say in most cases, you're going to want to avoid this. Best of breed solutions. You want to buy stuff that does marketing automation well. You want to buy stuff that does CRM well. And invoicing and finance, all that stuff, just focus on best of breed solutions. However, if you don't have the expertise for that, comes into pitfall number 3, putting the integrator in charge. Never ever do that. You are in charge of your project. Integrators are needed for a best of breed system, but they have a land and expand mentality, and that's actually a coined phrase from IBM, actually. They land and expand. They start with 3, they end with 30. And they're very expensive resources. So they charge you to learn the business. They charge you how to do mid-course corrections in the business. They charge you for new documentation, training, integrations, and yada, yada, yada. You get the idea. So you want to make sure that that integrators try to have a tendency to kind of complicate things. They want to make it as complicated as possible so that they get the 3 to 30 quickly so they can build those people out. You want simple. Focus on simple. That's if I could say anything today, focus on simple. If you get simple down, and if you need to make it a little more complicated down the road, it's much easier. If you start complicated and try to simplify it later, that's not going to work. Integrators also use contractors, so if you need to hire in resources, you want to make sure that when they leave, that they're leaving because they're not leaving for another project, because a lot of times the integrators will bring in these resources, and we call them the A team, and then you say, wow, this is great, and then all of a sudden, it's like, okay, here's a guy, you had a guy who had 20 years experience, now you got a guy who has 2 months experience, and that is real when you get with some of these big integrators. Solution, you run the project, I kind of alluded to that. Despite all the downsides, unless you have the resources, you're gonna need to hire an integrator. You may not know where to start, integrators will, but hire an integrator for their expertise and their ability to bring resources to bear. And they're an advisor in that process, and they're a resource pool. And that's how you treat them. But you remain in charge. And you want to make sure you keep the A team. So you are going to want to actually negotiate things like who stays in the project, how to keep them on the project, and if they leave to go to another project, it has to be with your permission. Cost change, you really need to understand how they address costs. So if you have a change to your environment, what is that change process? Because if you don't have that change process nailed down, you will end up with a $100,000 bill and you have no idea where it came from. It happens all the time. Make sure you also have access to hire those contractors that they hired, if that's the route you go, at the end of the project so that they stay with you and you don't have to train them, right? The fourth pitfall is over-design or under-design, meaning you try to actually do everything at once. You focus on your financial system, or you don't focus on your financial system, you do everything at once. Also automating stuff that shouldn't be automated. Sometimes there is stuff that doesn't happen very frequently, or they're very insignificant, or maybe you don't want to do that anyway. If you just automate a bad process with bad data, you're going to get nothing but bad data even quicker than you could imagine. So it's true. And if you have multiple events, do you have those people in those multiple events in your office? Are they doing the same process? Where they can. Sometimes you can't. But I mean, you want them to do all the same thing, right? So that's how to have one system. I'm going to go. Sorry. And then scope creep. You do not want to make sure the project gets larger and larger and larger and larger and out of control. and you want to avoid that. So like I said, start with processes first before you even touch a keyboard, and that's everything. I mean, again, I've said this a few times, so it's got to be important, right? Go through your entire sales process, your marketing process, your delivery process. How do you manage your inventory? All types of inventory, doesn't matter what it is. How do you manage your financial system? What does your chart of accounts look like? All that stuff is connected, right? And just make sure that you do that, even if you're not going to tackle it all at once. Map it all out. Look at your pain points and work outwards. So what that means is essentially, if I have a problem converting leads into opportunities or into sales, excuse me, all right, focus on that. Make a system that facilitates that first, and then work your way out, right? Decide what you want to capture. What are your KPIs? We talked about that a little bit before. Those KPIs are really are going to tell you whether or not you've had a successful deployment or not. What are your tool selections, and what do they do out of the box? Some of the stuff that comes out of the box is great. And so the more automation you do, the harder it is to actually upkeep. So that's important. And you want to focus on really less customization, more configuration. So I hear C configuration rather than coding. Coding is the guy in the back corner who barely looks at daylight, and he's in there doing all this stuff on his keyboard. I haven't done that in many years, so I don't even remember what it's like anymore. But the thing is that when you configure something, which is more click and drag and drop and actually creating parameters or whatever, it's more economical to keep, not only to do, but actually to keep it going, right? So when your integrators leave and you need to do an upgrade of some sort, you're really not going through all their code and trying to figure out what's going on. And it might be a little bit too techy for this group, but that happens a lot, and that's really expensive to keep going. Changes are much easier, and things don't break when new software releases. I can't tell you how many times I've had a software release from a vendor, and we didn't do testing appropriately, and it breaks, and you just can't. Where's it broken? And then you have to roll back, and you look really stupid, and your customers getting bills for $1 million, and how the hell that happened? And that stuff happens if you don't really check your code. So go towards less code, more configuration, if at all possible. And the last one is last one for this, there's probably a lot more, but is seeing this as a one-time investment. You just spent a lot of money. Processes change over time, people change over time, priorities change over time, what you want to look at changes over time, your problems change over time. It's not a one-time investment. You need to budget for ongoing maintenance. This is something that your business is growing. You need to keep your platforms growing with your business. It happens all the time. It's like, we did this thing, it was great, and then you go in and 2 years later they're going, oh, this thing stinks. And just because you haven't done anything with it, you just let it go. Your job is to keep it going and keep your business going, because your platforms will help grow your business. So again, each process has a business owner and is a member of ongoing change board. What that means is that before you change anything, those business owners we talked about earlier are going to get together in a larger group and say, okay, so-and-so wants to make this process change, and you need to vet that change before you do anything. Just don't put it in place, because then what you get is called the Frankenstein effect. All of a sudden, you were looking at stuff, you were going like, how do we get here? And it's because people just add stuff, and you want to clamp down on that part. And you do that through a change board. Don't let changes be made unless they're fully vetted, and you must change the plan. And then ongoing costs, additional stuff, is staffing, software, some of the stuff that we showed you on that $12 million bill. Those are ongoing costs. So you got to make sure you budget for those. Because when you get the sticker shock the next year, when you get your licenses for Salesforce, if that's what you use, you just got to expect that. I guess that's the point. So now, I have more, but or questions, either way.
Well, I don't even know where to start. You gave us so much information that while we catch our breath, I'll ask the first question. And again, to try to scale it down and make it simpler,
sure.
not branches all over the world and hundreds of shows. You talked about a change board,
yeah,
and you talked about business owners.
Right.
So let's try to think about an association that's in this room.
Sure.
that has a couple of events. They have traditional departments. Who is on this change board, and what is a business owner?
So you always have, okay, so if you're looking primarily at your sales system, you're looking at basically whoever heads your sales department, right? If it's a sales manager, sales director, VP of sales, what have you. I mean, they might not want to, I mean, the higher you go up, they might want to do it, and they may not know the detail. So you probably want to go to the level where they know enough detail about the system and how it's used by the end user. And then, of course, you're somebody in your IT department who's going to be on there too. And they're just basically just say, well, yeah, that'll work, that won't work. And that's it. And you usually hold those on a regular basis. Yes.
Down here. Okay. Hi, Greg
sorry.
from Clarion.
Oh, hey.
So with you being at Informa, obviously you guys have grown quite a bit in the last few years through acquisition of big platform
Right.
businesses, right? No, that would be me. Sorry. Penton.
Yeah.
And who was your other big one? Hanley Wood.
Sure.
So how do you manage? I'm sure you're dealing with hundreds of new employees.
Yeah.
Dozens and dozens of new shows and millions of dollars. How do you is the way to go here to create a central platform that you say this will work no matter what we buy? So whatever we buy, we'll bolt onto this?
Well, okay, that's kind of a loaded question. So actually, you're always going to run into something that you're not doing in your other businesses, right? I mean, so they sell products that you didn't even know existed. So I think the key is that you build it modularly. So I have a sales platform, I have a marketing platform, and I know those platforms are, in our case, are enterprise platforms that handle multiple types of business. And I'll give you an old example. When I worked at Staples, we had 93,000 employees, 4 different business units, anything from the retail store clerk all the way up to like people delivering copies to doctors' offices. The thing is, in the sale, and this was a sales example, the sales process is relatively similar. It's not, I mean, the reason why Salesforce, this is the example I'll give, Salesforce is so big into enterprise clients because the reality is that 9 times out of 10, you get in the lead, it turns into a contact and opportunity. So the key really is to understand what are my inventory platforms in my sales platform and what are my financial platforms, and being able to just say, okay, I just need to add inventory, or I just need to add these revenue codes in the chart of accounts, you do it modularly. I guess that's the way to answer it. And I think actually, I think it's easier in some ways for somebody our size because I think one is that I think you get to a certain size, you say we have to do this. I mean, it's not a choice. I think when you're small, working on Excel spreadsheets, it kind of works, right? Excel is the best CRM ever, as long as you only have one show and maybe 500 exhibitors. But anyway.
Additional questions? Okay.
What has marketing automation gained you? It's a big question.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think actually it gets us a much more targeted message to the audience we're trying to reach. I can't go over with you specific numbers, unfortunately, but I think we've seen a positive impact at Informa, and actually at every place I've put marketing automation in place, I've seen a positive impact. I think the ability to A/B test and things like that. I think you can help. You can really hone your marketing message a little bit easier. I think that things like MailChimp, for instance, are great for small businesses. But when you start to get to these enterprise level applications, they do a lot more. And I think that has brought in, I think, more attendees for sure. And I mean, exhibitors, I think that it goes through a different process. But I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, there's a related question. It's,
Okay.
Did you have an ROI in mind? And how did you measure the fiscal impact of investment?
Yeah, we did have an ROI. Actually, I'm probably the wrong person to ask that. But we did have an ROI in mind, and actually it was an acquisition cost of a new attendee and a new exhibitor. And of course, when we monitor that in our sales platform, it's easy to kind of report on that. Yeah, and we click rates, are the messages we put in forth before when we were using multiple platforms better or worse than what we're doing now with one single platform. So,
Who are we question over here?
So when you're hiring a business process architect, I think that's what you said. What should you be looking for? What kind of experience? What
Right.
kind of skills?
well, it's helpful if you get somebody who actually, well, I err towards getting somebody who's like a Six Sigma aficionado. And largely because they are meant to business process flow stuff, and they go through that a lot. And so people with those types of certifications help, but it really, really helps if you have somebody who's actually sold before. And it's preferably somebody in the industry if you can get them. They're just hard to find, right? Because salespeople generally aren't business process people. They are transaction oriented. So I would say you start with maybe looking at somebody who's done a lot of business process in the past. Sometimes those integrators will bring those people in, but they'll be expensive. Yeah.
We're sort of looking for somebody that understands the customer journey and
Yeah.
can build a technology ecosystem around that journey. So we want somebody that like totally gets marketing and our business and digital and technology,
Yeah.
and that's not, it's like the unicorn that.
Yeah, it's not quite the unicorn. Actually, it's funny you say that. A lot of the vendors that you deal with, like we've been dealing with ExpoCAD for quite a bit. We've dealt with A to Z in the past, and I have personally as well. Ungerbach. A lot of those people have some of those people on staff, which is kind of nice. Yeah, I mean, it's not easy. I mean, to be honest with you, if it is any consolation, it's not easy in any industry to find those people. So, but somebody who has a lot of sales experience, but who is really kind of tech savvy, and who could really just sit down there and literally is just, all it is a whiteboard session, really. You could almost go to an MBA school, and that's how I learned how to do it. When I was going for my MBA, they made me learn how to do it. So, and we just say, okay, well, what's step one in the process? And it's just really a whiteboard session. It's where a lot of people fight, and at the end you say, okay, well, you do it this way, you do it this way, you do this. Could you do it this way? And you do like as is and to be. And finding those people can be difficult. I mean, it just is what it is. Yeah, so I tried an MBA program though.
Earlier today, Nicole Peck used a graphic, a photo of King Kong on the top of the Empire State Building. Correctly, she said that's probably not a good example because it didn't end well for the big guy. Who leads this charge? I mean, I think she mentioned with the chatbot that from the top, she led the charge.
Yeah.
How do you have this team of people?
Yeah.
You have the experts. Who's the boss?
Well, the boss, I think it has to be business driven. I mean, the reality is it doesn't originate from the IT department at all. It's heavily involved with the IT department, but you really want to focus. It's got to be from really the CEO down. Whoever is the leader of your organization needs to take that charge. And again, it may start in one area. Maybe you have a marketing problem. It's not going to start with the CEO. Maybe it's to start with the VP of marketing. But you got to start somewhere. And that's the big thing. If it's not a groundswell either. You're never going to get somebody who's like a salesperson and say, I really need a CRM. Because all they really want is an order form that they can send out that somebody else could fill out for them and then get it back. And then they could then hand it to somebody and say, okay, and I'm going to go to the next one. And I always say this, and I say good salespeople are the laziest people ever, right? Marketers, though, really want to dig deep. And so it just depends on what your problem is. But I would say you want the leader of that organization, whether sales or marketing, and it'll usually be sales and marketing. It won't be operations generally. Yeah.
Do we have some more questions?
Screen. How many parallel systems do you need to operate as a small to medium association?
That's a good question. So I think you can get away, I mean, it depends what platform it is, but you could actually probably do something all in Salesforce, for instance, if you really want, and that's one platform. And that could do just about anything, but it's going to be highly configured.
Really short, right?
It's not a one-size-fits-all, but I would say you can get away with one if you wanted to. I would say that's probably what I would do. I don't know if that answers the question, but.
Wasn't my question.
Oh, okay. Well, whoever's question is, I hope it answered it.
And our friends at Feather want to know if you any new event tech companies or trends that you see.
Well, augmented reality I see is probably something that's going to pop up, and I know they talked about it earlier today. I think really some of the stuff you saw today, actually, augmented reality and chatbots. I wouldn't say virtual reality. I think virtual reality is dead for this space and probably many spaces other than maybe gaming. But I think that as it comes more and more expensive, and you're getting the same result of doing like customer service, especially 24/7 customer service, which sometimes is required, I think chatbots are gonna be all over the place, and they're getting better and better and better. So those are probably the two biggest ones for me.
Thank you.
Also maybe beacons. I think a lot of wayfinding is happening in events too. I think that also is an area that's going to grow.
Well, let's turn it now over to you. You said you had some some bonus
I did. I wrote this down. I wrote this
Okay.
down. Chimpanzees with hammers is what I said. Where's the guy from Feather? I told you I'd add it. I told you I'd add that. Chimpanzees.
Is there something we should know that's going on?
Yeah,
here?
no. I was going to say, I guess really what goes back to the sorry. I'm not going to find it. I wrote it, but it's, okay, piece of paper. Here we go. Okay, when a chimpanzee's hammer is meaning that don't develop a system that does something so complicated for your users that that they're using a third of the abilities, and I find it actually that's a good one. I find that a lot of times when you do marketing automation, a lot of times they allow you to slice and dice your information so granularly, and if you have a really good marketer, they buy into it and they're great. But a lot of marketers don't, and I think you just gotta be really careful. Don't give a chimpanzee a hammer, I guess that's what so, all right. So I said, so the ones I have here, nervous users so there's a lot of times you get a nervous user and they'll say, oh, this stinks. We gotta go back to what we used to do. That happens all the time. That's horrible. I mean, those people, you need to coddle them. If they're good. If they're not, out you go. Okay.
Wait, you drop so many thought bombs. So I'll raise my hand.
Sam just met me.
I'll tell you, I'll raise my hand. I'm a nervous user.
Yes.
Okay. So what do you do?
Yes.
I mean you talked about training.
It's much more in training. Actually, it's mentoring, it's training, it's retraining, it's sitting down with them. And I'm just kidding. You don't get rid of them. You train them. But you just basically sit with them until they get comfortable with it. Yeah, that's really at the end of the day, hands-on use of the system constantly. I think and reinforcing if they're using it incorrectly, reinforcing the right way to do it. I think that's a really big piece.
Again, we're going to continue this at the bar, I guess. Because, so when you talked about, I think you said the marketers that love to slice and dice, and you get too granular or you get too many options. Again, when in the process does your antenna go up, and who's the person that's supposed to say to this really sharp digital marketer,
right,
that's a nice to have, but it's not a need to have, and the other 30 people in our organization will never touch this stuff? Who stops that person, and when do you know when to stop them?
Well, and actually, I don't necessarily say you need to stop them, because maybe they're doing something that everybody else should be doing, right? So I guess really it comes down to is that during the design process, I would say, well, have you ever done that in the past? Or maybe get them in a group and say, well, do you ever see yourself doing this? And see what their answer is. And if a lot more people raise their hand that they would do that, then maybe you're not going down the wrong path. And there's some people that they're just so good. And the digital people probably are probably a little bit better than the booth sales, for instance, because I think they're more digitally savvy. And so they're used to kind of understanding their markets. So I got another one. You want to know? Okay. So change preparedness. A lot of times, it's kind of on the same lines, is that sometimes people just don't want to change. They love doing what they're doing for the past 20 years, and getting them to do something new is difficult. And I think that you just need to coach them through it. I think you need to allow for the blustering comments that you're going to get, and because everybody's going to that don't like change, or they're definitely going to complain initially. But just give it a little time. That would be my advice there. And the 1 or 2 issue naysayers. What's a good example of that? Well, it doesn't do 50-50 payments. It only does 30. It does a third of payments. I can't use this system. That's kind of like not a real complaint, but they really, it goes back to changing. They're not used to changing, and so I think again, I would suggest, just managing those people. We used to do it this way. That's a hard one because people's tendency, there's two tendencies. One is that they go back to what they're comfortable with, right? And the other one is, or maybe they don't start in the first place, or they figure out a way to game the system, right? They'll figure out, it's like, oh, I have this sale, this other guy is selling to the same guy, so I'm not gonna create Mike Clapperton, I'm gonna create Michael Clapperton, and I'm gonna get around it. That's a big behavior. I don't know if that's a good example, but there's a lot of people who are going to try to game the system and just know that that behavior is going to be there. I think in the sales area, and my area is more sales than marketing. You probably will figure that out. Is that in the sales area you have three types of salespeople. You have a salesperson who's really, really into the CRM, and they really like the customer interaction and taking notes and understanding where they're at in the pipeline, which is great. And then you have other types that just want to have, here's the form, I'm going to fill out these 3 or 4 fields and I'm going to be able to sell them something. And then you have the person who says, well, here's the form, fill this out for me and send it back. And I guess you got to ask yourself, what's your organization? What do you want? Maybe there's room for all 3 of those types of people. Maybe there's only room for 2 of them. Maybe there's only room for 1 of them. And you need to understand that and then plan for it. Let me see. I don't want to keep unfolding this up. Yes, rolling out software. This is the big one. So when you roll out platforms, be really planful. Don't do a lot of big bang rollouts happen, and not so much in the events industry because of how we're cyclically driven, but be creative about it. Do I roll out to one group? Do I roll out to maybe 1 or 2 users? I mean, you have all the data, of course, in there, but you're only training and getting your champions from your users. Then, of course, it makes it much easier to then push it through. Because when somebody says, "Oh, we don't do it that way," I'm going, "Well, those 2 people are." It's a much easier conversation to have. And I say, so be creative about that, and that's going to vary for each of your organizations. That's my end of my list. Sorry.
Okay. Do we have any other questions? Go ahead, please, from the second screen.
If you started plan and work out without the whole plan, how do you know when you're going to end up in a place where the modules don't talk to each other and you have the same problem?
Well, I have this thing called measure twice, cut once. Right. So one of my hobbies is building furniture, and you always know when you're building a leg or something like that, you don't want to create a short leg. So it really ruins the table. So the key is that what you're going to do is you're going to actually, that's why you design all your processes first in your interactions between the systems. So one system's output is another one's input and vice versa. And understand those mappings first. And then you just do a lot of testing. So what happens generally when you develop something, you're developing it in an environment that's an enclosed environment that's not going to do a lot of damage, right? Or no damage actually, because it's not in production. What you do is you just do a lot of testing and regression testing. It means going back and retest using live data, but not necessarily. And then so you work out a lot of those kinks before you actually put it into production. And then roll out slowly. There's been many times. So 70% of all fail, right? I've been in a few of those failures too. And what happens is that you get something that works great in test, put it into production, you put it live, and this happened with Staples.com, by the way. And it's just like, it's a white screen, why can't I see anything? And the thing is because we didn't test certain pieces in a live environment, so you just gotta keep on test and go through and even do live tests if you can, but a very, very low risk area. That's how you do that. It's more of an art. It's science, but it's also a bit of an art.
Well, I thank you very much. Thank you very much. Gave us a lot to think about. Thank you.